What's going on with Guilty Gear Strive on the Nintendo Switch? As some of you may know, today is actually a pretty big day for Guilty Gear Strive. Today we get the release of Unika. She's the latest DLC character in Season 4 for Guilty Gear Strive. And as you know, Guilty Gear Strive actually released on the Nintendo Switch about 4 months ago at the end of January. Back then, a lot of people were not convinced that the Nintendo Switch was even going to be able to handle this game. And the reason that people were of that mindset is because MK1 released in such a bad way. But upon the release of Guilty Gear Strive on the Switch, I made a comparison video where I looked at the original PlayStation 4 version and the Switch version. And to a lot of people's surprise, the Switch version held up pretty well, and in some ways it was even better than the PS4 version. In terms of visuals, you can barely tell the two apart unless you look for minor details like the outlines around the characters, which tend to be thicker on the console version, and also there's more resolution drops on the Switch. In addition to that though, what caught me and others by surprise is just how fast the Switch version loads. It's a lot faster than the PlayStation 4. I honestly still cannot believe that. This is an incredible port. The developers did a really good job. Even Dragon Ball FighterZ, which was developed by the same company, couldn't manage to make it load as fast as the PS4, let alone faster. The icing on the cake is that unlike DBFZ, Guilty Gear Strive has rollback netcode, but you know what? Not everything is great news for Guilty Gear Strive on the Nintendo Switch. It does look like the game has run into some problems recently, and that's what we're gonna get into now. So a few months ago when the game released, we knew that they were gonna be releasing Queen Dizzy for free on the Switch edition. Queen Dizzy was the very first DLC character for Season 4, but we didn't get any news about the rest of the Season 4 DLC and whether they were gonna be free on the Switch as well. My assumption at the time was that obviously Queen Dizzy was going to be the only free one and that the rest were going to be paid. Now unfortunately I just never had the time to stick with the game and practice like I wanted to, but I recently came back to try out the new characters because since Queen Dizzy released, there have been 2 characters released. So those characters would be Venom, which came out I think 2 months ago, and then Unika, who came out today. So in booting the game up, I headed to training mode to try these characters out, and lo and behold, they're not in the game, like at all. This is what the character select screen looks like on the Switch version today, the day of Unika's release. You know, normally when you have characters that are in the game but which you haven't bought, they will still show up in the character select menu, but they'll be blacked out and you won't be able to play them. Here, they don't show up at all, with the exception of Queen Dizzy because she's the only one that's actually been released on the Switch so far. You cannot even buy Venom or Unika on the Switch. If you go to the eShop and you type in Guilty Gear, only Guilty Gear Strive and a couple of other things are going to come up, but there's not going to be any mention of Season 4 or the ability to buy any of the 3 remaining Season 4 characters individually. And remember, this is 4 months after the game released, so it's weird that you can't even buy the new characters individually. Maybe they ran into some unforeseen problems, or maybe, and I think this is the obvious answer, and that is that since Queen Dizzy was released a full 4 months after her release on the other consoles, it's possible that these characters are just not ready for release yet, since they started development on the Switch version way later. Remember, the game originally came out in 2021 or 2020, I forget, on the other consoles, and not until 2025 on the Switch, so a full 4 years later. So since they're going to be coming so late, are they also going to be free? Probably not, that's my thinking. Another thing to keep in mind is the low player count. Here you can see me going through the Japanese player lobbies. All are at 0. You know, you would think that at least the Japanese lobbies would be full. The same is with the East Coast and West Coast US player lobbies. You might have more luck finding a match in the quick start mode. That's what I had to do when I was playing the game when it released. I was actually able to find a few matches back then, but that was 4 months ago. I would think the game would have more players by now, especially since it went on a big sale a few weeks ago. But if you look at the comments in a recent article about the game talking about Unika on Nintendo Everything, there's people in there talking about how they just can't find any matches on the Switch version. And this is as recent as just a couple of weeks ago. Logical Q here says, yo, you might be able to find a match for a single day on Switch when Unika launches. He says later that a friend of his tried to change when he plays to try to get games during the hours when people in Japan are playing. but still goes days without finding even a single match on the Switch version. It sounds pretty bad, honestly. I really thought this game was going to be a lot better received by the FGC on the Switch, but it looks like that just is not the case. It could also be that it retails at $60 and maybe people just don't want to spend that on a 4-year-old fighting game, even though it technically is still getting updates and balance changes and new DLC characters are still coming out. I don't know what to make of it, honestly. Maybe it would really benefit from a substantial sale for a few weeks. Like, if you look at the comments in videos or other postings about Guilty Gear Strive on Nintendo Switch, one of the biggest complaints they all have is that there's no crossplay. And, well, yeah, I mean, if the Switch version had crossplay, obviously it would be a lot more active for sure. But there's a reason that it doesn't, and that reason I'm willing to bet is that the Switch just can't keep up with the other consoles. So it shouldn't be as a surprise that none of the major fighting games ever have crossplay on the Switch. I think this is something that they should have been able to see coming, honestly. It's a 4-year-old fighting game releasing at full price, even though it does have pretty much all the DLC for free. What a lot of people are going to be looking at, though, especially in the economy that we inherited from the last administration, what a lot of people are going to be looking at is that full $60 price tag. It's like, don't get me wrong, it's a steal at this price. I like that they did this, but maybe a lot of other people just don't feel that way. Maybe one thing they can do is just make all the DLC characters unavailable and sell a different version of the game with just the base roster and sell it for $20 or something. The game was always going to be a tough sell in 2025 at $60, especially with the Switch One not being known for fighting games, and it's clear that the developers put a ton of love into this port. Like, honestly, it's like a totally stable 60 frames per second. It's a perfect port. So it kind of sucks to see that it went this way. But with the Switch 2 on the horizon, it's always possible that they'll release a crossplay update on that console. It might not be possible on Switch 1, but on Switch 2, even Street Fighter 6 and Virtua Fighter 5 Revo are getting crossplay. So it's safe to assume that pretty much anything the PS5 and Xbox Series can do is also going to be possible on the Switch 2. That's going to be it for today's video. If you dudes enjoyed it, you know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep bringing you more combo videos, online matches, and video game news. I'm SwitchPlayed, done.